Hello and welcome to the Smart City Design and Implementation panel, where I'm joined by an esteemed set of very learned people in the smart city and digital space. I want to thank Peter Trinh and Trinh for putting together such a fantastic set of panelists for this hopefully very lively debate on how we actually move forward from policy into actually designing and implementing cities. So I've been joined today by Professor Kieran Jude Fernandes, who's the Vice Dean of Durham and UNESCO UK, by Richard Streitz, who is the Chief Operating Officer of RU Global Impact, Michael Jansen, who's Chairman and CEO of CityZenith, Dr. Hila Oren, who's from the Television Foundation, then Othmane Zrikem, which is from the AO PropTech, and then Dr. Trinh, who's the director for the Institute of Smart City and Management, University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City. Thank you very much indeed for your time, very precious, and we're looking forward to hearing of your great insights. So I'd like to start briefly with Professor Yu Chong, because I know he has a bit of a hard stop. He has to leave us shortly. Professor Chong, could you tell us a little bit more about how your role has evolved and developed in terms of smart cities and what you're currently doing in that area?
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. So it's quite a short notice for me to prepare, and because I have another meeting soon. Yeah. So, but I'm very happy to have the chance to share my thoughts. So I think because I have been working between China and the UK for technology commercialization. So so basically we help many UK's technology get reach Chinese market to help with the smart city, smart agriculture, smart basically everything. So in China they may more use the term Internet Plus. So basically have all the IT related technology to support the traditional sector and facilitate the people. For my university, Surrey University, we're actually very good at technologies. So, for example, we have the best artificial facial recognition company. So to recognize your face so quickly, and working, I think also the voice. With our center called the Center for Computer Vision and Speech, so currently ranked #1 in all the UK's artificial intelligence centers. So that provides huge support for smart city technologies. And of course, smart cities also rely on 5G or 6G. And our university has the largest 5G technology center in Europe. So working with Cisco, Nokia, Huawei, and our technology have very good application to in industry. Then also I think smart city also now, especially for 6G and for the future connectivity, so rely on satellite. So Surrey satellite company, I think is the best small satellite technology in the world. So if you Google online, you find Elon Musk. Actually, he became shareholder in 2005, so that he can transfer the technology to develop the Starlink. And apart from the hardcore technologies, so I also focus on the investment side. So one of my company called the Indeed Group, so where I'm a director, we invest about more than 100 companies, startup companies in UK. So most of the technology is relevant to smart cities and to enable more easy life central people-centric. So basically, I think there are many ways for university technology to collaborate with any smart city technology. Also, in investment side, we can also help with this. And one more thing is about smart cities related technologies. And if we want to talk about international technology collaboration in smart city or other area, we think about intellectual property. That's very important for any technology to reach another market. So how we ensure our technology is unique. In the meantime, nobody copies us because it's unique. So many people want to, want to get it, right? So that's why I work with the largest IP company in China called IP Run. So it's the only multi-billion company in China. I'm non-executive director and also their UK operation director. In managing director for UK operation. So this one, we devise the model. We can help smart city technologies to register their IP for free. And then we take a small share of the IP and help them to grow in another market. We also run in the US. So basically, this is some of the activities. Since this is the introduction, so I don't want to spend more of your time. Okay, so that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Chong. I'd like to move on to Dr. Hila Oren, who's from the Television Foundation. Can you just introduce yourself in terms of what you're currently doing regarding smart cities in Israel?
With pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be with you at Hong Kong time. I define myself as a city maker. I think when we think of makers, not about a shoemaker or a filmmaker, maybe a little bit as a matchmaker. City makers are people that are working within the city, taking off red tapes and actually rolling red carpets. This is what Smart City is all about. That means making collaborations, listening to the residents, taking off barriers for things to happen. Now, lately, the last year, COVID-19 brought challenges worldwide, anywhere. First of all, with the most weakened communities. And every country, every city has its own asylum seekers, weakened communities, women, men, kids. It doesn't matter, the weakened neighborhoods where they need us most. So even if it goes before anything about food, we couldn't reach people. A smart city is a city that knows who are the people that need that food and how to provide that food in smart tools until their doors, or the opposite, to give them with special digital cards into their phone, so they actually, we upload it with city coins so they can go and buy food in local shops. So it does three things. First of all, the people that need the food get it. Second of all, we don't touch, there's no, COVID brought this challenge that we're all can't touch each other. So it was with no meetings. And the third thing is to strengthen the local community, the local shops, the local businesses. So people would go and buy next door and not on those big shops of food. So this is one example. Another example, or the other thing, was lots of people needed communication, whether it was kids that couldn't go to school anymore and needed to have their own communications, whether it's a screen, or the elderly that were stuck at home and couldn't meet anyone, and they were the most vulnerable. So we raised philanthropic money with the social bonds, and we provided those communication tools. Another community that really needed our help was the artist community. Now, this is a community that is in any global city, in Ho Chi Minh, in London, in New York, in Tel Aviv. There are communities that usually are strong enough to afford and to provide themselves, but now when they had no way of income, they needed our help. So the Tel Aviv Foundation was reaching out by, again, getting the money and getting the match from the municipality and making specific grants to give out to those artists. We were collaborating with New Orleans that also had this artist fund, and we learned from them. And I think for us, for city makers in smart city, we need to learn from each other. We don't need to invent the wheel every time. And we learned from New Orleans about this need for the artist community. But what they did is they did first come, first serve, and we understood that sometimes for artist community, it's not the best because they're not that strong on digital. So we helped our artists to reach. I can give more and more examples, but this was just to give you the idea, to wrap up in a minute, what it means to be a city maker in a smart city. That means to listen to your residents, to understand which are the communities that need you the most at this time for COVID, and how to reach out with digital tools and to give them that help. And what you just heard from me are 3 different tools which are not the obvious: the lights, the infrastructure, the roads, etc., what we always talk about. And I could go on, but I'll let you take it to someone else, and I'll elaborate a little bit more later on about financial tools.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much indeed for that. In terms of the work that you've been doing, Professor Kieran, in terms of a lot of policy, can you talk a little bit about the work that you're currently doing in terms of the design and implementation of smart cities?
Yeah, thanks, Hilton. So we've been working in the area of smart cities, and we've been trying to understand what it means to be smart city. So a brief introduction about myself. So I work at Durham University. It's a university based in the northeast of England. It's a very traditional university which was founded in 1286. And we have a number of very interesting research projects, of which smart city is one of them. So the fundamental question I've been trying to address is, what is a city? And what makes a city smart? So to address the question, what is a city? We have a view, we have a framework around it. Cities are about communities. They're about communities of people who live in an ecosystem. And the question is, what can make those communities smart or smarter? And there are 3 things that make them smarter. One is recognizing the people themselves, because these are communities that are interconnected to the place they live in. Technology obviously has a role to make that community smarter, but also governance. So we have been looking at an ecosystem of people and asking, what does it mean about people? What does it mean about technology? And what does it mean about governance? And we have developed a framework called Index DNA framework, which puts this ecosystem together in a number of layers. And at the heart of this is the ecosystem are the people, and there are multiple ways they behave, there are multiple ways they act, and there are several communities that coexist in an ecosystem. So we take a complex adaptive systems perspective to city, and we have been building layer by layer how people, technology, and communities come together for good governance, which I can talk in later on. But that's broadly what we have been doing over the last year or so.
Thank you very much, Professor Kieran. I'm moving on to Jason. Jason, sorry, I didn't realize that you were standing in for the eminent Mr. Michael Jansen. Your work at CityZenith is very, very important in terms of developing what is called digital twins. Can you talk a little bit more about the design and implementation process that you use for smart cities?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us, Hilton. Sorry for the last minute covering for Michael. He had something got called away for. So we've been developing and deploying a digital twin platform, SmartWorld Pro, now for around 10, 11 years. Each of those have been research projects as such. So delivering against a scope, against an ideal, against an outcome, and then really learning as to how do we need to improve moving forward in order to bring in all of these different ecosystems that everyone else has already spoken about before. And I think really the community piece there is the key one. Of course, you can get technological buy-in from experts, from engineers, from architects, from CTOs, data analysts, etc. But if you haven't got emotional buy-in from that community, then you're doomed to failure. And really where we have focused is having two sides to that platform. One very much around data. So how do we pull that data in? How do we optimize by simulating, analyzing, predicting, and creating movement? And then the other end of that is very much around the occupant, the tenant, the city officials, really anyone that needs to understand that data, how they can actually interpret it, visualize it, and interact with it. And it needs to be low touch, it needs to be easy to understand. And as human beings, we understand what we see. Well, we can't build a platform with data which only data scientists can use. If you want to get community buy-in, it needs to be accessible to everyone. And really that's been our learning curve, is how do we improve the engagement each project? How do we scale that? How do we push that out across cities? And the more and more projects that we're doing in the digital twin space, yes, the bread and butter, maintenance, optimization, energy resilience, it all plays a big part with regards to the facilities. But more and more, our clients are looking at how do they better engage their end customer. So our customer is our owner operator, but they have customers. Mm-hmm. So universities have students, universities have teachers, their customers. If you're looking at retail, obviously the shoppers are their customers in airports, passengers, etc. Is how can they layer existing technology, layer their own applications, embed that digital twin information into their own ecosystem, and allow those users to interact with it. And we're talking with, we've got districts where we're looking at doing digital marketing, wayfinding, room booking, transportation links, valet parking, things that seem trivial, but when you're trying to draw people into a space, a new area, and trying to capture them there and improve dwell time and improve experience, this is really where we're starting to move forward now with customers around their desired outcomes over and above infrastructure, water, energy, etc.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that, Jason. Very interesting. I'd like to move on to somebody who I've spoken to many times before, Richard. Thank you very much, Richard Streitz. Thank you very much for joining us from Rue Global. You, in particular, have had incredible amounts of experience designing smart cities, but not in the format that I think we're all familiar with, but on the format of building the Disney imagination experience. Talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done in terms of the design and the implementation processes that you have deployed in developing on those imagined experiences.
Well, thank you, Hilton, and thank you for including me in this panel. Yeah, my background is a little different and more unusual, I think, than most coming into this space, because currently I'm the COO of Frugal Global Impact, which is a consultancy company, and what we do is help corporations deal with inclusiveness for accessibility throughout their ecosystems, large multinational corporations and governments as well. So I have a sort of a foot in that realm, but as that is important, certainly in regard to smart cities, and my experience as a ex-Disney Imagineer, I had the good fortune of designing, conceptualizing, designing, engineering, and building for resort theme parks around the world. And it's interesting that we were doing smart cities before smart cities were a thing. When you think about the ecosystems of a resort or something like as large as Walt Disney World, that it is really a smart city. From just a physical size, it's the same size as Manhattan Island, which a lot of people don't necessarily take that into consideration. And so when you break down all the multiple complex systems that are necessary to make and deal with that, where we have over 250,000 people come on and off the property on a daily basis, and we're moving those individuals around the property. It requires a tremendous amount, not only just from safety and health, but sanitation and all the other sorts of infrastructural components that go along with that. But one of the things that's absolutely key about that, and has been brought up, is the human-centric aspect of it. Everything that we've done from the initial design of these environments is think about from the end user experience first. What are we after in improving an individual's experience, whatever that may be? And the fact that we're talking about what I did was entertainment and themed environments and so forth. The end results are ultimately the same: making the individual feel comfortable in an environment, engaged with their environment. These are all the same subconscious aspects that we are looking to have the end user engaged with. So it's important to start from that standpoint. Always look, and Jason, I think you touched upon that, how important that is to really start from that point and then move forward and say, well, okay, so now if we're looking at our resources and the data collection, which is absolutely fundamental. One of the advantages, of course, of creating a smart city is creating all the multiple touch points of data that can come in from all of these varied sources. And the distillation of that data, the processing of that data is hypercritical in allowing all the systems to be efficient, which is the whole point of having a smart city to begin with. This is absolutely true in any environment, and even in the environments that I was involved with in designing and engineering and creating. Those data points were absolutely critical. There's a lot of controversy, of course, when you take that out of the more private realm of a resort and take that into the city realm of what that data is and who's handling it and who's seeing it and how it's processed. But it is a fundamental key component of the overall aspect of a smart environment, an intelligent environment. So absolutely starting first with the people and human-centric component of it, and then folding into that, what are the needs, wants, and desires, and examining that process. So I'm looking forward to talking and getting more into all the details of that.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Richard. I think we've lost Dr. Trinh Tuan. So I'll move on now, sort of an open question to all of you, and that is that the major challenges of the 21st century include the rapid growth of many cities. So we talk about existing cities rather than new cities that have been built, and in terms of the growth in some, there's also the decline in others, and the expansion of the informal sector and the role of cities in causing and mitigating climate change. So there's a lot of evidence around the world in terms of town planning, in terms of the design, and then how to actually implement that, has been put forward by many, many, many bodies. Can you give me some examples of cities that are existing cities and growing, and the challenges that you've encountered in working with them? So, for example, developing smart city data points, as Richard pointed out, analyzing that data, and then putting that into practice. So what have the challenges been in order to do that? Anybody?
Yeah, Hilton.
Yes.
It's. I think you asked a very good question, and I think one of the things we should take a note of is when we say cities are growing, I think the perspective generally people have about cities is a geographical space. And there is some truth to that, because we are used to look at a city, we are used to look at regions from a geographical perspective. And when I use geography, particularly the political geography, so the city of York, which is part of Yorkshire, which is part of England, which is part of the UK. And then we try to fit all governance and all the things that we want to do in that region within that framework. Now, if you actually remove that perspective or that view completely, and then ask a question, how is a city growing? you will start to see some very interesting and exciting things. Now, let me take an extreme example. I could have taken examples from London or Singapore or New York or any of the usual cities where you have a particular feel, a particular look, and that's what people associate with smart city. I want to take the other end of the example. So if you think about a slum area in the heart of Bombay or Mumbai, there's an area called Dharavi. Okay. Now, for all political purposes, geographical purposes, you would classify this as a slum area because it is a slum area. However, if you remove geography from that and ask the question, what is happening in this space? It is basically it's a 2 square kilometer space. But in this 2 kilometer space, you have about 1 million people living. So it's an exceptionally tight space, of which 43% of those residents are self-employed. Okay, they basically have their own companies, their own factories. They are basically deriving. So there are about 5,000 businesses, 35,000 single-room factories. The average unskilled worker in Dharavi is earning about $2.50 a day. Now, if you look at the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, which in fact the very first sustainable KPI is $1.25 a day, he's earning about $2.50. A skilled worker is earning $20 a day. There are 60 primary schools, 13 secondary schools, 8 private schools, and the annual economy of this 2 square kilometer is about $1.6 billion US. Okay. Now this place is growing. It's growing as a city, but not in the way you perhaps think about as space. Okay. Now, even though this is technically a slum area, there is so much innovation taking place. And for example, this 60% of all the plastic from the city of Mumbai, which is about 20 million people, is recycled in this place, providing jobs for 250,000 people. And it's an economy. Okay, it's not just taking and recycling things. And so in my view, I think we need to start asking a fundamental question when we use the word smart city. What is it? What we do? It's about community. I think we should remove geography, particularly political geography, because Dharavi is connected to large number of supply chain companies. So for example, there is a leather industry in Dharavi that supplies to basically the top brands of companies in the leather industry. Okay, it's an unknown supply chain because everybody, if you map a supply chain, the last point where you can track that leather is the city, the port of exit, which is Mumbai. You cannot track it anything beyond that. However, none of us complain there is an issue with leather. The same logic applies to, say, rice manufacturing. Now, have you ever been to a supermarket in say, the UK and found out that there is no rice on the shelf? Maybe during COVID there was a problem, but in general, you never do. But if you track that manufacturing or production of rice, the last point you can actually track is basically a major city or a major port. So I think what we have become obsessive about when we use the word smart cities, too much focus on technology, too much focus on the geography of a space. So we are obsessed about saying, what can AI do? What can we measure? What we are not asking the question, what is it that the community is contributing as an ecosystem? And this is happening everywhere. I just use one extreme example to illustrate the point. But that's my perspective on this.
I'd like to take it from here, Professor, to take your point and maybe elaborate on that. And I'll put it that way. Let's move a little bit from urban development to social development. When you're talking again about the geography, about the urban, about the infrastructure, let's ask ourselves a little bit more about our citizens, about our social aspects. And that takes me to the open spaces, to the public space. I think COVID, again, gave us a great lesson about what we took for granted and we didn't really pay attention too much. And that's the PPS, the pocket public spaces, really little places just next door. Just when we go down from our apartment or from our office, there are public spaces that we didn't take care about them so much. We didn't think they are part of our smart city because we didn't control them. We didn't have data about them. But they have an extreme value to our health, our physical health, and our mental health. And I think we really need to take them now into consideration and start thinking, how are we managing them? Do we have lights there? Do we have buzzards for emergency so we feel secure? Do we have enough cameras out there? Do we have enough outdoor furniture? Can we sit down comfortable and work? Can we sit down comfortable and meet each other? Not only for leisure, but let us have these public spaces that are functional, not only fun and leisure and playground and sport, but also for schools and learning and business and meetings. The elderly people, if they want to come with their wheelchair, is it convenient? Is it good enough to meet 10 people around the table? Did you see any table out there? This is part of what we started working here in Tel Aviv and in Sydney. It is connected a little bit geographically, and when I mean that, that means to climate, because what you can host in the public space around the middle of the globe, you can't host that easily at the end of the globe. That means where it's very cold. But still, our health is very important. We understand that, and it's out there. So let's take a big, big, big focus, a big light, a big torch on our outdoor and ask ourselves, how are we using digital tools and technology to make the outdoor and the public pocket spaces more accessible? Hilton?
Yes, thank you for that. Now, Richard, you've had a lot of experience in terms of creating mixed spaces and where you are putting the citizen at the center of that experience.
Well, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's key to a satisfaction point of a person engaging with the environment is the constant juxtaposition of the business busy working environment and then the repose environment, the environment to go to relax. And oftentimes those are those public green spaces that provide that repose for an individual who can retreat from the frenetic and hectic pace of urban living. These spaces are fundamentally key to the psychology, to the psychological effects of the population in cities. It's absolutely fundamental in the environments that we've built that we create these quiet spaces, because there can be a sensory overload. If you, again, going to a theme park environment, and the correlation exists in an urban environment as well, the overstimulation can be actually, the mental overstimulation can be exhausting. And so you have to have natural points of stepping away from that, and sort of recharging, being able to mentally recharge. These are very, very key and important components to an environment when one is master planning and creating these spaces. But what's interesting also is that not only just in physical environments, but also certainly how cities are developing in virtual environments. And we've seen this as well. And this is something that is related to smart cities in regard to dealing with individuals and how they interact with their environments. But we're seeing a move from creating these sort of parallel virtual cities and spaces that then sort of breaks the tradition of a typical traditional geographical based environment. This is something that's upcoming and growing, and there's a lot of, as VR and AR are becoming more and more developed, we're looking at environments, and there's a lot of discussion about how overlaying virtual cities on top of existing city spaces via AR, augmented reality, and so this is another sort of whole other level of interaction with the existing environments, that you can have this intricate overlay on top of that, again provides a different way for an individual to interact and engage with their environment. In wayfinding, for example, can be a huge component of that, and in that sort of door-to-door delivery of an individual who wants to go from point A to point B. What's the best way to go, and the most efficient way to go, and so forth. These are all become extremely important components for that human-based design of these environments.
Thank you for that. Jason, in terms of digital twins and at CityZenith, obviously, the creating the digital twin, which is as Richard was saying, is a rendering, an artificial rendering and copy of the real system. In terms of the collecting data and collecting information from the people in those design spaces, whether they are active, engaging spaces or reflective spaces, how do you deal with that in terms of the?
Yeah, so it's really understanding what the end goal is. I mean, there are cities building digital twins to try and solve issues that they didn't know existed. Now, we all know there are many issues in cities that need addressing before you go and try and find new ones. And kind of following on from what Richard was saying around superimposing new spaces onto existing. If you look at the UK, there's been a survey done, especially within the corporate space. 18 to 24-year-olds are the loneliest generation going into that space. So commercial real estate owners are having to reimagine spaces to try and get engagement between those people going into offices, whether it's flexible working spaces, co-located spaces, to draw those people in, to draw interaction with other human beings in order to improve their mental health, improve their efficiencies, and it's coming down to control. So part of the thing that we kind of wrangle with is the need for the data to understand how they can optimize moving forward. But if you take a building, for example, a building doesn't use energy, people do. A building can be designed perfectly. You can run simulations against it. It will be a lovely green building. You put someone in it, it goes out the window. So it's then a kind of a balancing act. How much control do you give that occupant? Or how do you give them a perceived amount of control? And how can you start to adopt nudge theories to kind of help them change the way that they think? And that engagement with those occupants, almost kind of gamifying it to get buy-in. We've got some customers that actually do carbon credits, like carbon cash, so that they could be used to purchase things, free coffees for interaction between Bluetooth beacons and data. It's really about how do we address what they're trying to achieve and the people that they're trying to involve in it. With the best will in the world, if you haven't got people buying into what you're trying to achieve, you're never going to win. So we always look at that end user experience and then back it up with the data that helps them to move that forward. But we're not just finding that in the corporate space. I think Dr. Oren, you picked up on the need for public spaces and control for people going outside. I think we've all realized how terrible our houses are or our apartments are for indoor health and well-being when you look at the state of the air, the amount of the sunlight we've got, the amount of biophilia is concerned. So again, more and more people want control of their own personal space as well as their corporate space. So again, we're starting to work with residential developers that want to understand from a master twin perspective as to how is this facility working? How does this tower block work? How can we optimize it? But then how do we give each of those occupants a level of control of plugging in their own technology so that they can go away, they can start to change their temperature, they can change their air handling unit flow, they can turn their heaters on and off, etc., just to help them improve their own health and well-being. So we're finding this from different areas, but the more LEED certified buildings, the more well certified buildings, the more Green Star certified buildings that we're coming into contact with, the more it's about the occupant, and it's more about how they can service. So not deliver a digital twin, but deliver a digital marketplace or a digital service to their occupants. And that's kind of the approach that we're having to take with our customers now.
Can I take another step on that, please, Jason?
Yeah,
as you mentioned that 18 to 24 are the generation that is most lonely, and we're talking about residential. Let's just imagine that in a minute. You know, when we say residential, we always think of the building and the apartments and how we can control, but we never think of the first floor where we just, the public space downstairs where we can go down with our dog, maybe have a little garden for our vegetables, the top roof that can be shared by all these places, can be shared by all of the residential, the roof, the garden, maybe to have a terrace in the middle. We never do it. I think it's about time we take another step into social developing and thinking and understanding that all this public space, which is, I would say in a way, it being ignored, we should redevelop it better for our health and think how we can control it better, as you're saying. This is one issue. And the second issue is daylight and nighttime. Usually at daytime we work, and then we go into our apartments, and then it's nighttime. And then at night, when we go outside to the public space, we feel insecure, or some of us feel insecure. Maybe some of the men feel better, but women, if you'll ask them, and if you'll have a survey, you'll see that feel very insecure in the public spaces. How are we make a different offer on the public space at nighttime, where people can share it better, they have more time, less cars out on the streets, but still we can enjoy the public space, but feel secure and meet each other, because what we are is all the time lonely, stuck in our apartment, in our little rooms. How can we go outside and meet and collaborate? All these things are taking the same infrastructure, but just attacking it or looking at it from a different angle. Hilton, back to you.
Thank you. That resonates a lot with what Professor Kieran was saying in terms of his the slum area, which had incredible amounts of business going on in people's lives, but in a very confined space. And the knee-jerk reaction is we need to create more space for the people in those slum areas. We need to create better housing. We have to create better living standards and sewage and other utilities. But what we do is we try and throw in solutions which are what we do in normal urban planning. But here we're talking about really re-examining what do the people really need and how can they actually benefit from looking at it from a different perspective. So, I mean, what examples do you think that are being done in the particular area of Arabi, Professor Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, for example, there's a huge project going on between Google and a university based in Mumbai called the Indian Institute of Technology, which has a campus there. And what they are trying to figure out is, and from a technology perspective, they have used Google beacons, which are installed in basically many of the streets. Local shops can connect into those beacons, and basically it uses Bluetooth over a short period of short distance. And as people navigate the streets, they can get information pretty much on a number of things that might be of interest to them. Now, here you see an example of how technology has blended into an existing infrastructure, as opposed to basically redesigning the entire infrastructure. And I think coexisting is very important of both the people, the communities, and technology. And technology has to fit into this concept. So there's a whole term called Frugal Innovation, or it's also called Jugaad Innovation as another term, which tries to innovate, but based on a particular region and what fits that region. If I use an example, so we did a project with Manchester, a city in the northwest of England, on an issue which was at that time a big issue in Manchester around gun crime. Now, while I use the issue of gun crime, I mean, this is nowhere comparable to the problems in the US by any stretch of the imagination. Okay. Perhaps the total number of deaths in the UK over a decade would probably be the same as what perhaps happens in a day or two. So, I mean, nevertheless, it was an issue in Manchester, but the issue was not about gun crime. The issue was about lack of public confidence in the policing service of Manchester or Greater Manchester Police. That was the issue. Now, you could have used a number of usual solutions. The obvious ones being more police, more armed police, more CCTV, different forms of curfews, bouncers in front of shops. I mean, the list goes on. And these are all techniques that have been tried, none of which have been successful. Okay. Now, in Moss side, we looked at the problem in a very different way. So first of all, we looked at the intelligence of this particular place. And the fundamental questions we asked was, why is crime happening in the first place? What is the root cause of that crime? And we treated that particular crime as a disease in society. Now, when we did the project, very few people had heard about epidemic modeling. Very few people knew what R number in an epidemic was, whereas everybody today is an expert because of COVID. Everybody knows every form of epidemic model. And if you just use the word R number, everybody knows what 0 means and everybody knows what 1 means. Okay, so, but when the project was done, we treated the issue of gun crime in Moss side, particularly in Manchester, as an epidemic. And the question we were asking is, why is the R rate in certain areas of this crime higher and why is it lower in other places? Now, the fundamental thinking here was, nobody is born and nobody starts their life by committing a gun crime. There is something happens in this disease that over a period of time takes you to a state where you commit a crime, i.e. in this case, a gun crime. Now, the data is everybody in the UK that has ever committed a gun crime has always had a previous conviction for something else. So what you could look at the data and say is, if you have committed some crime, you're more likely to commit a gun crime than somebody who has not in that particular area. So you could have two residents, neighbors, where one has committed something trivial and one has not committed. So you could then start assigning R values and say the R value for somebody who has committed a crime is higher than a person who has not committed a crime. So we started to treat the entire problem as a disease in that community rather than looking and saying, how many more police do we need that are going to be monitoring the street? Because that is not a solution to this problem. Anyway, the long story short in this conversation is, there is literally no crime in Moss side now. There is almost no gun crime in Manchester in at least the last 5 to 7 years, because the policing tactic has changed where culture is at the heart of that policing practice. And if you know, in the UK, which is a very different police force to the others, it is policing by consent as opposed to policing by law. And the key indicator that Manchester uses is the concept of public confidence. Nothing else. how confident is a community in the policing practice of that region? And that is all they are focused on. Everything else takes second priority. I'm not saying that's not important, but it's the way we look at a space, we look at a problem, and we try to solve it. So there's no one universal answer for everything. But that's the way we have tackled some very, very key issues, be it innovation, be it gun crime, be it crime in general. But that's the way we look at things.
You know, I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on that, and saying that it's interesting how hearing your example really rings true with the examples I've experienced as a result of working through the theme parks, where we are directing and managing, in essence, tens of thousands of people literally around an environment. And this we do through subconscious suggestion. And what's interesting about that is that works because of exactly what you said, Professor Kieran, about confidence, right? When people enter our environments, they have absolute complete confidence of the control of the environment to which they're allowing themselves to get into. And so as a result, they at a subconscious level are very open and suggestive, and aren't necessarily as guarded about a lot of things. And that allows us as an organization to be able to help and move people around an environment that they wouldn't necessarily do naturally or otherwise. And that's done through a number of different of methods. I don't need to get into that, but I can say that that is absolutely fundamental on how that works. And so much so that we have police and security forces from all over the world come and watch how we do that, because we're able to assemble 8,000 to 10,000 people in about 10 minutes and disperse them fully into an environment in 5-6 minutes. And so the ability to be able to do that, to control and manage that many people in such a short period of time, interests, of course, a lot of people. And I can say firsthand that I witnessed that with, in fact, the Israeli security force. When I was, we were doing a project at the time, and we had a whole delegation from Israel come down from their police security forces to do exactly that, research and understand how we do that and take some of those practices back. And so absolutely, confidence is key to being able to deal with that. And of course, how that works with smart cities is critical, because if the public doesn't have that confidence in the environments to which they are allowing themselves to be engaged in, you have a serious problem. You can have the most incredible smart city built in the world, but if no one wants to go to it, it's really not all that smart, is it?
That's very, very, very interesting. Professor Oren, in terms of your experience, of course, in Israel and Tel Aviv in particular, which is a historic city, it's very difficult to move people around the city because of the close confines of all the narrow streets and things like that. In your experience, what sort of techniques have you been using in terms of the design and implementation of moving people around those spaces that you talk about, to where they can choose to be quiet or choose to engage?
So you're talking probably about Jaffa, which is the old city, because Tel Aviv is only, Jaffa is 5,000 years old, and Tel Aviv is only 110 years old. So Tel Aviv, we don't really have that problem. And in Jaffa, it's just like Barcelona and the Gothic quarter, or any other old city, any other place in the world. I think what we all learned is we just leave the cars out. We don't even put them in. This is part of, we have to think out of the box about transportation. And again, I must say, I know I'm a little bit boring, but again, the last year gave us such a lesson. Because we all looked about smart transportation, but what we understood that if we use different hours, and if we use Zoom, and if we don't just go out on the streets, because we don't need to go to meet so much, we don't have to be physically every place. If we use those same roads a little bit less, then the problem changes all around. So what we do here is we have lanes for bicycles, lane for those birds, lane for public transportation, but mostly we don't give parking anymore. When we build new buildings, new art institutions, we don't have parking. We don't want cars to come into the city. We understand that in 20 years from now, we don't want cars in the city. We want less and less cars, only public transportation, and less cars owned by the people, because the infrastructure won't hold it anymore. It's still hard for our generation, and when I refer to myself as a young person, but 50s, 60s, we can't say goodbye to our cars, but we need to. It's not about new infrastructure, it's about changing our set of mind. So just like changing the set of mind about hours and using the public space more at night, same thing with transportation. Using the same routes and the same roads, but differently, different hours, using them less, not allowing cars, not building new parking lots, not building new roads, so the state of mind will change. And maybe I'm a dreamer, but I really think that in about 10 years we will see that change, because I'll tell you something about Tel Aviv. And I think Tel Aviv, in a little way, has all the R&D of all over the world, the corporate from all over the world, the startup scene, Google, Facebook, everybody puts their R&Ds over here. So you can see the really, the young generation, the 20 to 30, the early adopters, the engineers that are sitting there, they don't have cars. You won't believe it. Now, what is happening is that the offices of these R&D are changing their place, because the HR are the ones that are deciding where these offices will be. They don't want to be anymore in the old city because it's not convenient for them to get there. So they're changing. They're moving to a different district in the city where it's the most accessible for them with public transportation. Would you believe that? So this is what it is. If you'll come to Tel Aviv now, this is what you'll see. I think in a way we can show the early adopters to all over the world. Just like now with the vaccine, we are lucky to be the first ones to be out of the COVID. Why? Maybe because we're stupid, maybe because we're smart, but we are not afraid to take chances and to take the first trial. So just like the whole country, which is quite small, we're only 9 million people. So we took this trial, the first one, same thing with transportation. I think people need to understand that they have to leave their car, no more car, and then moving and transportation will be different.
Wow.
Thank you. I think that's a. Can I add something there?
Yes, no, please do. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I mean, on transport, because this is a burning issue in so many cities, and in particular, we are facing this as a huge issue, particularly the examples which you talked about, Hilton. Very narrow streets in many cities in the UK. I mean, in Durham, as you probably know, York or London is slightly an exception. I mean, you cannot have more than one car on the street at a given time. But if you look at what's happened, it's again mindset. So mobility, which is the issue you're talking about, the idea of owning a car started with mobility as a prestige. It then moved to mobility as a convenience, and then it moved to mobility as a necessity. What we need to change minds is mobility as a service. And I think what we have not been able to make that transition yet is, and this includes us, as Hila said, it includes policymakers, it also includes industry. So all three need to connect on this to say, what does mobility as a service mean? Because a lot of colleagues and a lot of people still think mobility is a necessity. And the reason they think it's a necessity is because where the offices are, the impression people have, and dare I say in some countries, policymakers haven't necessarily pushed it either. I don't want to be particularly picking on any countries, but well known that they still think having transport, having trains, having other forms of transportation is not what the citizens want. In fact, if you look at it, it's perhaps the exact opposite. So I think there's a wave coming, and this is almost like the fourth wave, where it's mobility as a service. And I think we collectively, when we talk about cities, this has to be at the heart of our conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of, Jason, in terms of the work you're doing with CityZenith and the digital twins, the testing of the hypothesis that was put forward in terms of mobility, what sort of work has been done in that particular area with regards to changing the mindset of the people and the policy changed, and looking at what the impact that would have on the digital twin model?
That's a very good question. So our approach to the digital twin platform is that of aggregation and integration. So rather than trying to build out multiple simulation engines direct within our platform, we're working with architects, engineers, contractors, owner-operators, cities to be able to hook in incumbent technology. So effectively, we end up with one centralized composite, one holistic view of all of that data, which then can be interacted with third-party technology. So with cities, it's almost like creating a vendor ecosystem of all of the different data points, the data touches, all into one space, and then you can run any simulation you want to with any technology that you'd like. Now, most of what we've been looking at is around infrastructure for EV charging. That's been a big topic. And most of it has been around actually pedestrianisation of areas during COVID. So how do we actually look at reimagining that space and changing direction of foot flow or traffic flow because of social distancing and getting people to and from spaces safely? Our approach there is really around giving you a tool set and helping you to then identify different ways of being able to do that through the visualization, through the data repository, through creating relationships, bringing in GIS information, simulation information, asset movement, tracking, etc., and then run those scenarios over and over again until you've got a good understanding of what's happening. And that's the type of thing, Dr. Oren, with your outdoor spaces, as to how do you bring the community outside. If you look at some of the engineers out there, like the Bureau Happold's of the world, the Arabs of the world, they've got entire divisions now that they sit down with a development and look at exactly these types of questions and these types of outcomes. And then the digital twin can help play that part through the design and the implementation of those spaces to help drive that community output. So I think kind of a roundhouse way of answer there, Hilton, apologies, is we're very much focused on what the end requirement is. We're not driving any of that discussion as such. We are working with those cities and then helping to point them in directions, but ultimately help them meet their goals around the simulation piece.
That is very, very interesting in terms of coming up with the design and then testing various forms of implementation. And the key thing is the feedback loop. In the use of technology today, is how do you design the spaces that you believe would be acceptable for the citizen within that space, within that community. But what feedback loop are you getting in order to know, are you actually delivering on what your promise is? And I mean, Rich, you probably have some experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Feedback is fundamental to the success of any model that gets put out there, and can't be understated. Certainly, in practice, one of the ways that we've done that. As the Disney organization has been doing it, I say we. I'm no longer with the Disney organization, but I can't help that. Is the exit polls. Exit polls from the parks is hypercritical to that endpoint data receiving of it, and the way the mechanism that we use is very simple. Is as people are exiting the parks at the end of a very long day. As they're exiting, there's individuals that are standing out. There's cast members that are standing in front. They have tablets nowadays. In the old days, it was a pen and paper, but they have tablets. They ask individuals that are walking toward them one question, usually designed so that it's a yes or no answer or a one-word answer, so that the individual or the group or the family doesn't have to stop or break their pace in leaving, or doesn't have to feel compelled that they have to give this long answer or whatever. And oftentimes, and the other subconscious aspect of doing it that way also provides an instant honest answer. They don't think about it, because that's exactly what we want. We want a response that's immediate without having to digest any of it, to just off the cuff, the first response. That data becomes absolutely vital, and we ask questions of all, hundreds and thousands of different types of questions, from food to experience to this attraction or that attraction, or the temperature, was it too hot, too cold, did you have headaches, whatever, all kinds of questions. And then this data is then pulled back and digested and processed, and then improvements and so forth are adjusted appropriately to accommodate the feedback from the individual. So that feedback loop is hyper critical to the whole process.
Professor Kieran, your examples that you may have had in terms of, you talked about frugal innovation, which I think is it's a very powerful approach and methodology in terms of using innovation in its place at the right time, appropriate for that environment, and but doesn't require extensive development. What examples have you had in terms of frugal innovation and that feedback?
Well, the one example which I talked about, using Google beacons, is one example that is a very successful example, and has encouraged a lot of very small suppliers to link their products to fairly large-scale operations in a way. So that's one well-known example that is in the media about how frugal innovation can work. But there's also piggybacking medication, delivery of different vaccines that can be piggybacked on existing cold chains. So, if you look at the geography of some of these places, it's not a 6-lane or a 2-lane motorway where you can have a cold storage truck bring in vaccines into the system. Okay, and that's not just in the case of that. That's a problem in many parts of the world. So then the question happens is, how do you deliver vaccines in these places? Can these vaccines be in some form be manufactured in such a way that you are postponing manufacturing at the right time that gives it the least amount of time it needs to be in a cold chain, for example. And so there are several examples where people have worked around the space to develop frugal innovation.
Hello? Did we lose you?
No, sorry. That was the point I was making. Sorry, Hilton.
No. Sorry, I thought we'd lost you for a second. I don't want to cut you off. Jason, I know we're coming close to the end of our over an hour of great discussion, and I thank you very much, everybody, for your great contribution to a very lively discussion in terms of the design implementation of smart cities. In terms of smart cities and your vision, I just want to do a quick round table of the group. Jason, before you leave us, your view of how smart cities will evolve and develop, and the technologies to enable these smart cities to grow and develop. What do you see in the next few years?
I think that there is going to be a lot of learning from these next 500 cities that are supposed to be going up in the next 5 years. There are lots of good initiatives out there, lots of good thinking points. I think really as an industry, there needs to be a clear ROI on a smart city and how a digital twin actually helps to meet those objectives and what the savings are. I think that the advancement of the technology, the interoperability, the standards that are trying to be put in place by the organizations like the Digital Twin Consortium. I know that Microsoft are trying to create standardized wording and programming for digital twins. I think these are all going to be important over the next 5 years from a technology point of view. But ultimately, it's the data that's going to rule and the policies that are put in place within those cities. So I think everyone will be watching over each other's shoulders to see what the other one's doing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jason. And it's Richard.
Well, I think it's important. One of the things that we didn't touch on, but I think is actually really critical in the sort of the design and implementation of smart cities, is keeping people at the table who need to have all the stakeholders, and especially the youth. I think it's important that we make sure that when we're designing and creating these spaces, that we have the voices of the youth at the table, and the more marginalized groups. We have all of the person with disabilities, women, people of color, everyone is at the table, because the environments that we're looking to build are for the future. And for the future, the issues that we are divisive about now really aren't going to matter. And we need to be prepared and design these environments to be that very much engaging and inclusive for all people. And the best way to do that is to have the youth, because I think the youth right now, they really get this. They don't think about a lot of the divisiveness that I think the older generations have baggage to. So that would be my parting comment, is to make sure that we are inclusive and have everyone at the table, particularly the younger generations.
Well, thank you for very forward thinking, and I really applaud that. Thank you very much, Richard. And Professor Kieran, your view of the future.
Well, my view, all the two points are right. My view of the future is the map which you see behind Richard is going to look very different.
Yes.
I think the map of the future is going to be far more connected. It's going to be regions. It's going to be clusters. It's going to be trade corridors connecting to one another. And the way we start looking at it is we will all be part of different trade corridors. We'll be different part of clusters. I think we'll be a very different society where all the things, some of the things which Richard talked about, it's going to be far more inclusive. It's going to be far more global. I think there's going to be a far more growth around thinking as a global citizen than perhaps regions or cities or countries. So my vision of the future is we're sitting here in, say, 10, 15 years, and we have a completely different map behind Richard.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that day. Thank you very much indeed, for your great contribution and the time you've taken out and your great insights. Professor Kieran Fernandes from Durham, thank you. Richard Streitz, who's from Rugo Global, and Jason Thomas from CityZenith. And unfortunately, the others had to go, but just to give them their due. Dr. Hila Oren from Israel, and then we also lost Dr. Trinh but we'll have her back at another time. And then thank you very much, everybody, for your great contribution. Thank you very much for actually sharing with us your views, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Thanks, Hilton.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.